So to start off the discussion, could each of you introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about your story and some of the leadership work you've been doing related to our theme. So Christine, we're going to start off with you.
Okay, good morning to you all. My name is Christine. I'm from New York, and I am first generation American college student. And my background has a lot to do with youth organizing. In my freshman year of high school, I was introduced to a community organization called Make the Road New York, where I was able to be politicized, receive political education, and also be empowered in terms of learning how to advocate for myself. And through that work, I was able to advocate for educational reform with the Urban Youth Collaborative as well, and being able to travel to build with other young people doing this similar work. And through that work, I was able to be part of the mayoral leadership team for school discipline and climate, and I was one of the only youth in the table, so I have had that experience of being the only young person in a very important space of decision making. And I was also part of counseling my peers throughout the college process with CARA, College Access Research and Action with the CUNY Grad Center. And I was able to be part of a film called Personal Statement, and everything that I just explained now is represented to it, so I feel like a clip of the film would do more justice of introducing myself. So. Yeah.
No, you're not ready?
I don't want to click it. You do it.
I can't.
Dana!
I want you to click it.
No.
They're looking at your GPA, and they're looking at your SAT scores, and they're looking at your personal statement.
And then she's like, you might not get accepted anywhere.
I've been knocked down, I've been harassed, I've been disrespected. Everything in life is a battle. If you want something, you gotta fight for it.
What if I make the wrong choice? What if I pick the wrong school?
Voy para la escuela y no vengo para atrás.
Una niña no puede andar sola en el camino.
Porque yo soy una niña.
Claro.
We're all thinking to ourselves, it's too much. Every document meant life or death.
It's pretty hard to grow up in a world where you never feel good enough. You start to wonder, what did I do to deserve this?
There should be more guidance counselors. There shouldn't be one guidance counselor for each grade.
In some schools, it's 700 something students that have one guidance counselor.
This is why we're here. I can help you. I can do everything I can to help you.
We'll be assisting you guys with the whole college process.
Have you guys applied for college?
No, not yet.
If you want to go to college, you can.
SAT. It's sábado, mañana. I wanted to change people, and I wanted them to feel that they're not alone, they're all in this together.
Just seeing other people succeed is pretty cool, especially when you had something to do with it.
I just need to get myself together. I don't want to let them down. I don't want to let myself down.
Welcome, Coach McNeil.
They were making me feel like I only had one chance, and that chance was today.
It's supposed to be an enthusiastic process.
Because you're getting me upset.
You are all leaders. Leadership is about being committed to your communities, to your peers, your friends, your families, and to justice.
Back up, we want freedom.
Students have leadership. If you wanted something, why can't we get together and do it?
I think I gotta click on this one.
Little pumpkin.
Hi, I'm Enoch Jemmott, and I'm calling about my application process.
Okay, do you know your ID number yet?
No. And as you see, the film sheds light on the treachery behind the college guidance gap. And along with the film, I am one of the impact campaign leaders that's associated with the film. And we'll be launching in spring. And the impact campaign focuses on informing students to let them know that their voices and their stories are more powerful than they can believe. And we're super excited that the Impact Campaign will be launched in spring, and we're also excited to announce that John Brenham, the executive director of Get Schooled, one of our partners, is here, and we can have a discussion with him and ourselves after if you guys would like. And that is my story, and I think we also have a small clip. You know, I'm a media production major. You know, I really like showing film. So we have a small clip about the introduction video that we showed to the students that will be interacting with our campaign in spring. Yes, the answer is absolutely yes. Sharing your story can change the world. I have experienced it firsthand by sharing my story in the film Personal Statement. In the film, you see how I almost gave up on my college dreams because when I was applying, I was bumping up against so many obstacles, I started to question whether I even belonged in college. After seeing the film, students come up to me sometimes crying, saying they relate so much, and they now feel that they too can beat the odds. And believe it or not, there's super dope research that proves sharing our stories really can change the world. According to the research, just knowing that we all struggle and we all question whether we belong truly helps. It makes it more likely that we will persist when we find ourselves in those moments of despair. The research also found that when students share their own stories because they want to help others, the chances of all of us succeeding increases even more. That's remarkable. Do you realize what that means? If we all share our stories, we can improve the odds that students like us get to and through college. That's why we created the We Belong in College campaign, and here's how it works. All you have to do is share your story through a video or a written post. Tell a story about a time when you questioned whether you belong in college, either while applying or when you were in college, and include in your story how you managed to persist and how you came to believe that you do belong in college. For inspiration, you can watch some of the videos that other students have already shared. And don't forget, when you post, to use the hashtag #WeBelongInCollege, because we do. We do belong in college.
All right, well, my name is Isa. I am a recent graduate from High Tech High Chula Vista, which is a charter school in San Diego, California. And I am currently a UC Santa Cruz scholar, I guess. And I worked together with my partner Anna here, and we were the founders, teachers, and co-curriculum designers of the first ethnic studies program within our charter network of 16 schools.
So, yes, my name is Anna. My name is Anna. I'm also a recent graduate from High Tech High, and I'm attending Stanford University. And Isa and I began our activism in 10th grade when we went to a school that had a predominantly student body of color, but that was not represented in the curriculum that we were being taught or in the cultural or in the clubs that we were allowed to have on school. And so we created ethnic studies as a place to allow students to bring their cultural identity into the classroom, to learn about themselves and their peers through history, and to gain solidarity and empowerment through their education.
As we moved through the process, we realized that ethnic studies has a lot larger of a destiny to serve than just for our small classroom of about 25 students. And we learned while learning about ethnic studies in order to teach ethnic studies that it really is a space and that actively is working against institutions of oppression and racism. And we believe that if every student in the United States had access to an ethnic studies program, we would be able to see more Black and brown students going to college. We would see higher graduation rates, higher rates of attendance, and of course, more sense of student belonging and voice in the education system.
And so from that realization, Isa and I began creating professional development seminars for educators, which we conducted for educators at our school and throughout the 16 High Tech High charter schools connected to ours. And we trained educators on how to integrate ethnic studies, culturally responsive pedagogy, and anti-racist teaching practices in every subject at schools, not only in the High Tech High charter, but also across the nation.
So I'm going to pose the next set of questions to you all as a panel, and feel free to jump in wherever you'd like. So what do you see as the biggest barriers to students' voices being included in conversations about what education should look like, and what are some of the preconditions that you think need to be put in place for that to happen?
Well, briefly, I think everyone in this room knows that the power within the youth is like remarkable, right? And it's unbelievable. And what we're lacking as a system is that constant system of input from students. Like, their voices needs to be constantly heard, and when those students do speak, there's some sort of consideration taken apart. There's like appropriate, noticeable appreciation from those voices that needs to occur, and that system needs to become like an implemented thing within all systems of education.
I think within the education system, there's a lot of hierarchy from school board administration to administration within individual schools to the hierarchy between teachers and students, or even sometimes within students and other students with tracking and divides along race and gender. And until those hierarchies are fully addressed and recognized, and until our communities come together to dismantle those hierarchies, then we're not able to truly co-create and transform our communities into one where voices are being heard from students, especially marginalized students. Because frankly, students won't feel comfortable sharing their voices or empowered to share their voices when they're working in a system that is actively disempowering them.
I think it's also important to recognize that like a key word that Isa used was co-creation, and that we want our students to feel ownership over their education and over their classroom spaces, that they know that our education system is here to serve them, and that they are the clients in this situation, and that we're all here to serve them. And so until they feel like they have that ownership over their education and they have the empowerment to be able to make input or to have input and make change, students will not have that empowerment to actively contribute to our education system.
I feel like there isn't a real structure to connect with students put in place. I know, like, in my experience of like even doing like my advocacy work, like whenever I had the opportunity to testify in City Hall, like I would have to miss some sort of like a portion of my school in order to be there. And like when I'm there, like we have to wait for everybody to speak, and then the young people can speak. And like we just have to be real of like how we really want to connect and talk to like students and empower them. Like in my experience in the mayoral leadership team, I was one of the only youth in the table, and even being there was an interesting experience because of like, all right, the bureaucracy of like dealing with like political stuff. But like, I think the idea of having young people in the table is good, but in terms of like the work that should be put into it in order to actually like meet young people where they're at, like, I don't know, we have to be real of like what you were mentioning, like all the forces that lurk below the surfaces. Like we need to talk about like the reality of like the history of like even in a school setting of like segregation or like white supremacy or like the history of slavery, or like a lot of the forces that go behind to like why is even hard for students to graduate or to be present. Why is there a mass incarceration or like suspensions, expulsions? Like why are a lot of things the way they are? There's just, we have to be real about the structure and have real like radical change or action.
So when you've seen students' voices heard and they feel their voices matter, either in your own experience or in your peers' experience, what's happened as a result, both for them individually and the broader impact, and what happens when that's not the case?
Well, I would like to say, so there was this, we were luckily enough to be invited to this screening that was organized by two middle schoolers named Emmy and Soraya, beautiful, articulate individuals, right? And they were conducting a screening of our film, Personal Statement, and their initiative and passion came from them seeing the film and realizing that there's a mess within our system, right? And they're heading straight towards it. And they got in front of the audience members and they're like, listen, guys, like, I'm so happy to be here, but I want you, they're in front of their peers and their peers' parents, and I want you guys to know that, like, the system needs to change because we are about to, like, endure how messed up it is, right? And then they were then invited by the city council member, Ben Carlos, and he invited them to begin drafting legislation, and then he also invited them he hired them to work in his office over the summer, and that just seeing that happen just from like young individuals, that young, willing to stand and inform their own peers, that shows that student voice there's an opportunity to express themselves, and they have that moment to share their ideas to their peers, and it's really uplifting.
Issa and I, a lot of our experiences within the classroom. And so in our ethnic studies class, we mentored students to teach the class with us so that we could have that experience of co-creation and ownership of our education. And so from that, we saw an incredible transformation in our students who really just, from that feeling of ownership and belonging, became empowered and passionate and excited and angry about all the issues that we were learning about. And it created just an incredible transformation among our students who went from sometimes being detached, feeling like they didn't belong, to being completely enthralled and involved and excited about their education, to the point where they were ready to step up and ready to share knowledge with their peers.
And I think what happens is when you give students a platform to share their voice, it creates a ripple effect. The fact that we were given a platform as 15-year-olds to teach our own faculty-approved course that was at the high school level and create and design the curriculum within our group of 3 founders, that had the ripple effect where we then saw the power of working with our peers to create a curriculum that was truly reflective of us. So then we decided, well, if we're peers with the rest of the people in our class, then what makes us hold any power over them? What this really is it's about harnessing community power. So we went in and we worked with every single student and mentored them and showed them how we learned to be teachers and leaders amongst peers. And they stepped up to the same plate that we did. And now we see those students facilitating the classroom after we've graduated from high school and moved on to college. We see them doing new things with the classroom, using their own creative ideas that really come from when you bring more voices to the table. And the fact is that they're bringing new people into the ethnic studies classroom, and then every single one of those students goes into their normal everyday like homeroom classes, math classes, science classes, humanities classes, and they inspire others to do the same because they've become passionate change makers in their community.
Whenever we're in dialogue in school, or like even in like restorative circles where young people and all stakeholders, whether that be a staff or a teacher or like a community member, they're all in one space and everybody's looking eye to eye. And I guess like the power dynamic shifts where everybody's just like, everybody's holding each other accountable and everybody's responsible for themselves and each other. And I know like behind that is just like that idea of like building community and not really enforcing like hierarchical dynamics of power. And I know like at the very least like having young people just empowering them with responsibility for themselves and each other really becomes the drive of like engagement. And, yeah.
So I think we've already started touching on this a little bit, but where have you seen students' voices included in education, and what are some of the conditions or contexts that have been in place for that to happen?
So what happened with our ethnic studies class was kind of, excuse me, out of the norm for our school. No one had ever led a class before, but a structure that was integrated into the high-tech high system that we felt was really representative of student voice was the hiring process. So when new teachers were to be hired at high-tech high, they had to go through a multiple round application, and their interview consisted of teaching a sample class in front of students, and at the end, all the students would write a reflection about how they felt about this educator and if they felt they would belong into our high-tech high environment, what they liked, what they disliked. And then the educator was also put through a student interview. And so on multiple occasions, Isa and I were able to be those advocates for what we believed our school needed. And at the time, especially when we were getting ready to graduate, after having built all this momentum of ethnic studies and culturally responsive pedagogy, we decided what our school needs are educators who have a background in ethnic studies and who know ethnic studies. And so from that, we were able to give a lot of input, and through these interviews, we were able to, what we believe really impact who was being hired. And now we have multiple educators at our school who were not there before, who have an experienced background in ethnic studies and who are actively contribute to this movement that we started at our campus.
Yeah, and it's really lovely to see, looking back at the projects that are going on now at our school. We went to a predominantly Chicano Latino school about 5 minutes from the San Diego-Tijuana border, and now we have a teacher whose major was Chicano-Chicana studies, who's teaching an entire project about San Diego lowriders and lowrider culture.
And we interviewed.
Yeah, and she was one of the candidates that we interviewed and really advocated for, and now we see all of our younger peers super excited because she brought this lowrider onto campus and parked it on the basketball court and everyone's learning about it, everyone's excited about it, and that's what happens when you have students engaged in the hiring process, engaged not only in smaller levels of advocacy within the school, but really in every level, including those kind of administrative aspects of the education system.
And I feel like once you give those students those moments to speak and actually use their voices, they capitalize really well. We had a screening in Pennsylvania at the University of Penn, and 10 days after the screening, the city and state passed resolution and legislation that they get the student to counselor ratio to the recommended 250 to 1, right? And that was remarkable. And to speak about structure, we walked in there not feeling, I feel like structures are normally based around, in the atmosphere when students walk into rooms with adults and policymakers, the structure is you can feel the belittlement, you can kind of feel that doubt, and that is what truly needs to reform, that mindset within us that's subconsciously affecting students' voices. So yeah.
Absolutely. I feel like where I've seen student voice be heard a lot is in our work of college access, being able to work underground, to work against the problem of we don't have guidance, we don't have counseling, we don't have the resources to actually apply to college, and so we also advocate and testify, and we talk to stakeholders about the changes that we need, but we can't always wait for policy change. We have to act right now. People are suffering right now. And so being part of a movement of sort of peer mentorship, counseling, we are able to also engage with young people, with our peers in a different level, and also take leadership in our school. Yeah, really pretty much that. I know we recently just went to Iowa, and we got to speak to high school students, and after, just one day after, all the feedback that we got from young people were now I know I can go to college. Before I didn't believe this was a path for me, or me seeing you have all these obstacles and struggles gave me all the strength to persist. And so, yeah.
All right, so we're going to do one final question, then we'll open it up to you all. So there are a lot of people in this room who have this influence and ability to shape the way and enact the structures you're talking about. So what's one thing you want to leave them with before we open up the conversation to their questions?
Okay, so
just one thing. No.
I guess I'll go first. You all, I would like to applaud you all for being here. Right? It starts with events like these that true remarkable reform will occur. Right? And For example, we were on a podcast with this man named Eric Waldo. He worked for Reach Higher, which is Michelle Obama's college access initiative. Mm-hmm. And he was telling us how like he just saw the film and he worked for the Board of Ed and he was trying to reform FAFSA. He thought he knew everything in it, he thought he knew everything what to do to change the FAFSA, right? And it wasn't until after he saw the film that he truly understood the lived experiences of the students. If you're trying to change something for students, the best place to go to for information are the students, you know? Mm-hmm. So just concluding with that and just, you know, really critiquing your minds and how they're pillared to think particular ways, and you guys with the openness that you guys have obtained, like sharing that and enlightening others to think just the same.
If I could leave you with anything, is just the reality of the urgency of these issues. The fact that students, like predominantly marginalized Black and brown students, are not going to college, or that they're not graduating high school, or that the achievement gap exists is not like some anomaly that just happened. It's based in historical and institutional racism. And so when we do nothing, we are contributing to institutional racism. A quote that we always talk about is that institutional racism and like culture of white supremacy is like an escalator. And so even if you are just standing and not moving on this escalator, you are moving in the direction of marginalization. It's not until we turn around and sprint in the opposite direction that we're actually going to make change that is going to benefit and empower our students. And so it's really the urgency and the seriousness of this issue that I'd like to leave you all with.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely always something that needs to be pressed. It's not about, it's not that we're living in an okay education system right now and that like we're just here to make it a little bit better. It's about the fact that like lives are being damaged, people are being forced into the school to prison pipeline. Like students are really suffering, and that urgency needs to be felt within everyone in this room and outside of this room. And I think that begins with speaking to students, understanding students' perspectives, and you know, if you're seeing community protests or students walking out, actually listening to them, hearing what they're talking about instead of battling this kind of administrative and student divide, because those protests are going to keep happening, and students are going to continue to be angry, and these issues are going to persist unless administrators are really listening and breaking down that hierarchy and thinking about how we can better co-create an education system that is empowering for all students.
I would say that one thing that I would like for y'all to take away from this is that we need a shift of mindset, and we need to see young people as like cultural workers and restorative justice practitioners and healers and organizers and movement builders, and we need to just build like collective consciousness together and be real of like the actual obstacles and real like lived experience that young people are going through, and like stripping away from like what the power or like that comes between that is really just meeting young people where they're at and just being real with that. I feel like for me, doing the work as a college counselor, I definitely have seen a lot of my peers go to college, like students that would always say like school is not for them, and all they really needed was somebody to talk to like express what they were going through, or like to be seen or to be encouraged. And so like that's one of like the immediate like impacts that I see, like students feeling more confident in their body and like believing in their power, in their knowledge, and just like trying out college, going to college.
So for me, the film does a great job of holding all of like the adversity that I went through in high school and just bundling it up, and like every time I go to a screening, it's like, look at you suffering on this big screen. And so this is like kind of what happens. And I'm like, and as weird as it sounds, but I can take that and reflect from it, and along with my family and along with the friends that that sat with me through the adversity I went through, I can take it and reflect, and like I'm like inspired now because I know I can get through those hurdles. Like I know I can get past this moment where I'm not eating and starving, and those moments back in high school were moments that I thought were barriers that I could never climb over, you know. And then to know that I'm here now, like shining as bright as I can possibly be, like that's what fuels me, and I feel like that's what my family took from it, and that's what's constantly driving me to push forward and persevere as well.
I think that definitely my family and friends have been impacted, usually because when I do this work, I'm bringing them along. Like Anna and I have been best friends since we were 11 years old, and we do this work together, and it's because we're both so passionate about this work, and I'm not exactly sure at this point who started it, but we definitely feed off of each other's energy, and that's really the beauty of having a community of people who believe very passionately in the same things that you believe in, is that you get to work closely beside them, and that energy builds off of each other. I think another thing, maybe a family response that is often not heard of in like student leadership, is that it does take a big toll on your workload, on your mental health, on trying to balance all of the transitions of youth life, especially the transition between high school to a university. And I think that that's definitely something that needs to be taken into consideration with student leaders, is that oftentimes a student leader has all of the responsibilities of a normal student, and then on top of that, they are taking on additional responsibilities to try and be a change maker in their community. And because there are so many barriers put up against them, it really is a constant struggle. And just because that struggle is something that a student believes in and is passionate about, that doesn't necessarily mean that they don't need the same support that an adult who is in the same position would receive.
I think the greatest impact that I've seen has been just a domino effect of empowerment and just like awakening from students. Like we said in our ethnic studies class, it really was a domino effect and a product of our mentorship from our students. But it's really inspiring to see how not just in one area, Issa and I being passionate about like working to end institutional racism through education is our front and our platform, but through that we've empowered other people. One of our students, Catherine, is now like an advocate for anti-human trafficking, and so many of our other students have seen that empowerment and believe that they can have that kind of impact too in every single field. Absolutely. I think in no way do we say like stop mentoring your students at all. We've had really wonderful adult mentors in ethnic studies. One of them was Sarah Isla. She was our freshman humanities teacher, and what she did was she listened to our concerns, she validated them, and then she stepped back and gave us space to fix it. And so I think that's really what it's about. It's about having that constant support from an adult and knowing that like your emotions and your concerns are validated, but I believe in you and I believe in the power that you have to change this, is the like best mentorship that I've ever gotten.
Yeah, and I think on top of that, like while we are still, like we talk a lot about peer mentorship, peer mentorship is something that I think really it has a lot of values, but it also arose out of necessity. If I could go back in time and if we could have like gone to high school and already had an ethnic studies class and not as 15-year-olds had to start teaching and designing our own ethnic studies class, that would have been the goal, really, and then find ways to build off of that. So I think that the role of teachers and of adults in these situations are really, really valuable because this is work that is coming 100% out of necessity. And then on top of that, when you combine like the peer and teacher relationships like we had with Sarah Islas and other mentors at High Tech High, it really is about that relationship building coming first. The reason that we felt so inspired and impacted by our teacher mentors was because we felt that they got to know us and cared about us as people, and then as students, and then as peers. We broke down barriers at our our school in a lot of ways. The fact that we call Sarah Islas, like our teacher, we call her Sarah. All of our teachers we called by their first names, and they called us by their first names, and like this was done intentionally. It's because they wanted to show us, and we wanted to build that relationship where we could see each other as learners from both the teacher and student perspective, where we were always feeding off of each other the way that Anna and I feed off of each other, the way that everyone in this room feeds off each other. And it's about understanding and valuing that a student's power is just as valuable as an adult's power.
And I think with that real quick, the most important role of an educator in this work should be of an ally. And so the reason why I don't really see it as like student-teacher mentorship is because it was that peer mentorship and them saying like, you are here being an educator, creating an educational experience, and I'm going to aid you in that, like, because that is my work also.
Absolutely. I think that we should just be mindful that the smallest interaction with a teacher and a student can be the most, like, can be huge in that student's life. Mm-hmm. And it's that understanding where you become more critical to the things that you do and the things that you say. So.
Everything. Honestly. And also, like, behind that is just, like, I feel like a good question to always ask yourself is, like, who am I accountable for, and, like, what are my intentions, like, in terms of, like, mentoring or, like, engaging with young people.
I would say that a couple of things. The sense of belonging is phenomenally powerful, right? Just that feeling of the feeling of not being alone will drive students to continue to get through that college process, that crazy intense college process, right? And then for me, from personal experience, visiting schools is really imperative, because to understand what is truly out there for me, I visited one school, and I ended up going to that school, and like as chill as it was and as much as I learned, it definitely wasn't the best fit for me, you know? And students, they're young individuals, are left with deciding what their future will become. Like, you know, you were about to take out tons of loans, you know, these young kids are putting themselves into debt from the age of 15. They're deciding what their next 4 years of their life will be, you know? So giving them that option to understand what is to come is really important. Just visiting schools and and understanding that.
I feel like definitely we need more guidance counselors. We need somebody to really guide young people's experience in terms of like making this important decision in their life. And I noticed, like, even in my experience, like, had I not had the opportunity to be trained on the college process, I would be totally lost myself. And so it's just having that conversation earlier, like even in elementary or in middle school, about like starting to think about futures and like what would somebody want to study, and like who would they want to, like, what kind of needs, like, do they have, and how can they receive it, you know?
I think for me, the biggest help would have been help with the financial aid process. Someone always told me it doesn't matter what school you can get into if you can't pay for it. And so I'm also come from a background where I'm not a first-generation student, and still the financial aid process was just like ridiculous for me. It was ridiculously challenging to navigate. And so really that support for students, because as he said, our students are like getting into debt and making major life decisions that will impact them literally financially for the rest of their life. And without, even now, like with that insecurity and like not really knowing what's going on, and that like not having adequate resources for that is really, really difficult and really, really scary for students.
Yeah, I think another thing to keep in mind too is that universities and colleges are predominantly like white Eurocentric institutions, and up until very recently they were not welcoming to people of color or to women. And so to keep in mind that like when you are helping students who have been historically marginalized get into college, you also have to keep in mind how are you going to make sure that they are still feeling supported once they get there? Because if you look at who's going to college and then who's actually graduating, those rates are very different. And that is because no matter how much you prepare a student for college by helping them get into the college, when they get there, if they don't feel like they belong, and if they feel like the odds are stacked up against them, or frankly, if they just come from a community like we come from a community that's predominantly Mexican, and it's a culture shock going to all of a sudden UC Santa Cruz that is predominantly white.
Or Stanford University, who's also very predominantly white.
Yeah, and so when you think about just the way that the fact that some people do grow up with a cultural advantage in that institution, then those are also needs that must be addressed. And then I think on top of that, there is a really important balance that needs to happen in high school, where students are being given the opportunity to learn about themselves and sustain their own culture while still balancing that with knowledge of the culture of power. Because it's important for students to have access to the language, to the tools, to the skills that will make them successful in our frankly institutionalized racist society. Those tools need to be there, those skills need to be there in order for them to be successful. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that we should sacrifice using that time in high school as a time to sustain culture when it's absolutely necessary. Students should have access to things like ethnic studies. Students should not be taught that their language or that their culture is wrong because one of them will make them more successful and one of them will not. And that's something that I think we'll talk more about in the ethnic studies breakout session, but knowing and recognizing these institutions for what they are and then seeing how you can support students going off of that.
All right, but can we thank all of our students for an amazing